You're listening to the Bail in the Midwest podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Bail in the Midwest podcast, where we explore a variety of topics related to bail, pretrial release, and the criminal justice system in the Midwest. My name is Shane Rolf. I am the Executive Vice President of the Kansas Bail Agents Association, and I've worked in this field for the past 35 years. Several of our past episodes have been about so-called bail reform, but today we're going to get more into the nuts and bolts of actually working as a bail bondsman and some of the things that we do. Like most small business owners, a bail bondsman has to be a veritable jack of all trades. He or she has to handle the day-to-day operations, manage agents, handle advertising, keep the books, manage the government reporting, as well as actually deal with the customers to generate the income that keeps the doors open. But unlike many small businesses, the bail bondsman has to be able to locate and apprehend individuals who don't want to be found. And this ability to successfully locate missing people is one of the primary things that separates a successful bail bondsman from a bankrupt bail bondsman. In industry parlance, this is called skip tracing or bail enforcement. And my guest today is Alex Price, who is a nationally recognized expert in the art of skip tracing. Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Shane. It's my pleasure.
Alex, I just kind of glossed over your background by calling you an expert. Can you kind of expand on this and tell us all the great things you've done, your background, your CV, that sort of stuff?
I have been a professional skip tracer for 38 years of my life. I recently just turned 60, so more than half my life I've been doing this, and it's not something that I've dabbled in. When a lot of people say that they do skip tracing, it's part of their day-to-day activities where they have multiple things that they do. It's just part of their job. It's literally all I've ever done. And I've primarily worked over all these years in the fintech world, auto recovery, equipment, motorhomes, boats, anything collateralized, and in the bail industry as far as bail recovery, as you said earlier. So I've written 3 books on skip tracing. I wrote the only national certification program on skip tracing. And when 2020 hit, it just totally, not just me, but for pretty much the entire free world, it obliterated a major aspect of what I do. And that's, for over the past couple of decades, I travel extensively, about 150 days a year, coast to coast, border to border, teaching skip tracing on site, lunch and learns, trade shows, and that ended that. So I've gotten real big lately into doing webinars, and the podcast world came knocking at my door, and I've done a slew of podcasts over the past year. And I have to say, I find being a guest on podcast to be one of the most intriguing and rewarding things I've done in quite some time. All the work's on your end. Being a guest is easy. And guys like you that are great interviewers make guys, cavemen like me look like intellectuals.
Well, the world has definitely changed over the past few years, and we'll kind of talk about how the world has changed as far as skip tracing, because it certainly has changed over the past few decades. But let's sort of get into some definitions so we kind of know what we're talking about. Generally, I view a skip as someone who's jumped bond, that is, they've missed court on my bond. But from a professional skip tracing perspective, can you give us some definitions of what we're talking about? What is a skip and what is skip tracing, precisely or generally?
The first question on what is skip tracing is the most common question that I get asked. A lot of the podcasts that I've done have been like leadership type podcasts, and some of their audience may not know what it is. And once I explain it, it's kind of an aha moment. You almost can't name an industry that doesn't have some form of skip tracing within it. It doesn't matter whether I'm talking to law enforcement, a bond company, auto finance, insurance. Everybody has to do some form of skip tracing to get to whatever their end result in mind is. So when you're looking at all these different industries I just mentioned, law enforcement is looking for a criminal, a process server's trying to serve paper, a bondsman apprehend somebody that didn't show up for court. On the auto recovery side, repossess collateral. But they all have to start with the basic task or basic function of finding the human. And once they find their individual, then the end result comes into play. So more often than not, when I'm teaching, I don't even ask, what the audience does, because everybody does the basic function of we need to find a human first before we go to step 2 or step 3. And if you take skip tracing kind of back to its roots, it started as most things in Europe, and it was something that described someone who had left owing money on their hotel, their bar tab, their restaurant tab. So of course it's a verb, it just describes an action of someone who left the area without paying their bill. And when it came here to the States, it was kind of taken over by the fintech world and was more often than not used for someone who skipped out of a contractual obligation.
Okay. So some of the tools, I mean, I know you and I had a brief meeting yesterday where we kind of discussed this, but old school skip tracing versus more modern skip tracing. When I was first involved in this and sort of teaching myself how to find people, you had the use of reverse telephone directories. So if I had somebody in some other city, I could call the library in that local town, go, hey, can you crisscross this number for me and tell me who this comes back to? Or can you check this address and tell me what phone numbers come back to? Eventually, I ended up getting my own cold directory for the greater Kansas City area, which is where I was. And we kept that for years and years and years. And that's basically gone out the window. But now you've got things like Facebook and other social media. What are the basic tools of the modern skip tracer?
Well, I distinctly remember when I first started out, we didn't even have a computer at the bank. If they needed to verify if someone made their payment, you had to get the teller that they made the payment to call you and say, Jonathan Consumer's here making his payment, because everything was done off of paper collection assignments that every morning printed off of one of those dot matrix printers that sounded like a machine gun. And we had basically the telephone, the application, and the crisscross directory that you're talking about. So most of the job was done out in the field. And that's something with this generation that's kind of gotten lost. If I needed something from the courthouse, I had to get in my car, drive, wait in line, use a microfiche machine, pay a penny a page, drive back, analyze the information. If I needed something outside of my area, I had to have a friend to do it for me and either verbally tell me what they were reading or B, mail it to me, because there was no texting or schmexting or fax or anything back then. Now you fast forward to today and you have social media, you have OSNet, all the great databases of which I transitioned and now work with one of the premier data providers in the country. We're in the information age, but better than that, we can have it now. With the click of a button, we can access more information in seconds than what you and I in the 80s could gather in probably a month or more.
Oh, I absolutely, remember, and still do this now, where you'll get into somebody's Facebook page, and if it's open, you go look through their pictures, and okay, well, now you've taken this picture, you've got this selfie taken in front of the house, and then you go to Google Maps and look at the street view of the house and see if it's the same house that's on the address that you gave or some alternate address, and go, wait a second, this house right here, this matches this other address right here. So on this date, 3 days ago, they were standing in front of this house. Maybe we should go check that out to try and find that person.
Or Instagram, and what a lot of people don't think of is they just think of the marquee names of social media, and that's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. But there are actually 65 social networking sites that are around the world that are used in different countries that mimic the ones I just mentioned. So I have a PDF, and at the end, I'll give you my contact info. And if any of your listeners would like a copy of the PDF, it lists all 65 of them that are in countries like Latin America, Russia, China. In China, there's WeWe, and it's a social networking site that, of course, is controlled by the government because it's a communist country, but it mimics Facebook. Because even though Facebook is not in China yet, Facebook still covers about 4 billion people. But there's a lot of places it doesn't reach. So if you're looking for someone that is new to our country, do you think they'll be on our Facebook or our social media sites? Do you think they might still be using the ones from their country that all their family or friends are on? So it's good to understand the social networking space. And it's a pro and a con. I like social media, and then I think it's that and the cell phone are the two greatest threats to mankind. Because if you think about it, when we were kids, if you wanted to find out where all your friends were, it was very easy. You looked for the house that all the bikes were just thrown into the middle of the front yard. Now you've got Facebook groups. So we live in a society of 128 characters or less, or just a picture of something. So people have forgotten how to communicate. And we have now what I term not skip tracers, we have cyber trackers that do everything via the computer, and they lose a lot of that experience that you gain in the field where you learn body language, cultural differences in certain cities and even neighborhoods, and quite frankly, just how to communicate human to human. So a lot of people that I talk to in the bail enforcement world specifically, they're not holding conversations, they're holding interrogations. And by doing that, they're going to be very little information obtained because interrogations just simply don't work.
Well, and that sort of leads me into another kind of talking point I talked about before. One of the things I've always said about, when people ask me, what do you do? How do you find people? In order to find someone, very often you have to find someone else who knows that person, knows where they are, and get that someone else to talk to you. And I think a lot of newer bail enforcement agents, people that, that didn't grow up in a previous era, I think they rely too much on more databases, skip tracing searches like TLO and IRB and some of those types of places. So if say TLO pops an address and they go hit the address and they strike out, they'll come back to me, that's the dead end, nothing's there. It's like, well, what did the neighbors say? Well, we didn't talk to neighbors. Well, why not? I mean, that's a perfect source of people to talk to. And sometimes we really do forget that skip tracing or bail enforcement is not always just pressing a button on the computer and out comes the address to the defendant and you go grab them, but rather that sort of computer work, databases, Facebook, those sorts of things can provide additional leads, other people to talk to, ex-wives, baby mamas, people who might know where the fugitive is and might even want to talk to you to give you a little bit of payback. The whole hell hath no fury approach to trying to find people. Since talking to people is such an important part of skip tracing, what sort of tips and strategies do you have on how you talk to people and who you need to look for to talk to?
Fantastic question. And there's a television show on Showtime that I've become fanatical over. It's called Billions. And the lead character is a hedge fund guy. And this was just one saying he had on one particular episode. He's never repeated it, but it really struck a chord with me. And I use it as in my email signature and everything I do. And it's everyone has access to the data. I just analyze it better. And if you take, now that we've kind of defined what skip tracing is, if you take it to its basics, it's talking to as many people as you can until you come across the right person to talk to. That's all skip tracing is. So if you don't have good communication skills, you're going to really run down a lot of rabbit trails and waste a lot of time and resources. And it's the one job that you have during your day-to-day activities you have to be fully focused on, because you're hunting the most elusive creature on the planet, and that's man. And today's skip is 10 times smarter than a skip of 10, 20 years ago, because just as we have continued education classes to go to, there's classes taught all over the country in hotel business banquet rooms and on the dark net, et cetera, on how to fraud, how to hide, how to make bad phony IDs, so forth. I go to a lot of the classes because how can I teach this stuff if I don't know how to recognize a fake ID? So when you're talking to as many people as you can, you have to start with understanding a little bit about human behavior. And I don't care who you talk to, everybody has a circle of friends. I call them satellites. We all think we're the home planet, and our friends, our family, our coworkers is that core group of people we surround ourselves with. And it's personal and it's professional, and it can change depending upon where you're at, and some of those bleed through. As we go down the paths of our lives, that inner circle changes. So when you talk to somebody on an application and they tell you they don't know where John Consumer is, because the very job that you're in, you become jaded. You think they're being dishonest where they might be telling the truth. Because the only reason why somebody skips out on any contractual obligation is they've hit what I call a speed bump in life. It is never something positive. It can be an addiction, a loss of relationship, a loss of employment, any number of things, which is why, Shane, most of the time when you apprehend somebody that has missed their court, tell me if I'm not 100% factual here, most of the people that you find are relieved it's finally over, because court or jail was not the scariest thing in their life they were hiding from. There's something else out there. So you have to find that speed bump first. And that once you find the speed bump, which is when things started going bad for the person, that will lead you to a new core group of people, because whatever the speed bump was probably put a wedge in between your customer and whoever the reference on the app is.
Right.
And they've been called and bothered so much by so many different people on the consumer side, the legal side, that they don't want to talk anymore. They've washed their hands of it, or they really haven't talked to that individual in 6 months. So when you're talking about skips, there's two things that when I teach classes, I really drill home on. No skip ever becomes a leprechaun or a unicorn. They don't turn into a mythical, magical creature with special invisibility cloak powers. They're the same person they've always been, doing the same things. They're just doing it in a different area with a new group of people. They might still have a few of the people they hung out with prior that the bridge hadn't burned, but usually it's a new group. If they were bowlers when times were good, well, guess what? They're still bowling now. They're just at a different bowling alley.
Right.
If they were into working out, well, they're still working out, just at a different gym. And it doesn't matter if they've only moved, which is the norm when you're dealing with skips, 7 to 10 miles from the last location, or if they've moved across country. Their habits, their likes, their dislikes never change, because humans just don't change. It's part of one of the characteristics of being a human, and that's that we're creatures of habit.
Well, I mean, just in story time here, this was a deal several years ago where I assigned some guy to go get picked up, and the bounty hunters or the bail enforcement people came back and, oh, we couldn't find him. They're not really helpful. And so I called and talked to our guarantor and go, look, we're going to need to know a bit more. Tell me more about what's going on with this person. What do they do? Where do they go? Well, I haven't seen him forever. Well, what does he normally do? And, through a little bit of talking, found out that, 5 days of the week, he's having breakfast at the same restaurant. Well, ta-da, we just had breakfast at the restaurant the following day, and he comes walking in. And so he just slid into the booth next to him, go, hey, sorry, time to go. So, I mean, it is finding that right person, finding those habits is important.
Well, people try to make it a lot tougher than it is. And I'm glad they do, because if they didn't, sometimes they might not need me. So I'm glad there's still a aura of mystery around finding people. But one of the biggest mistakes I see in this generation is out of the gate, when they have a skip, they almost play like a realtor, and all they think about is location, 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 when they need to go back to that file. And it's not a popular word in today's culture, but they need to start by profiling the individual. And by profiling, I mean, I've got to know who somebody is before I can find out where they are. And there's certain things, it amazes me. A couple months ago, I did a skip tracing class at one of the state associations, and they asked me to stay the day, and they set me up at a banquet table. And prior to the day, they had let everybody know to bring case files with them, and I'd sit with people and look at their files and tell them what I would do. And I was just amazed at just the complete lack of information on an application when you're investing 50 grand into that individual based on a promise, because these are promissory notes for the most part. You might have collateral from a cosigner, but you're going to spend 6 months getting that collateral if it's a house or anything else. So
if you're even successful.
Yeah, so I was amazed at the lack of information, where there might be a name, an address, a social, and a signature, and that's it. And there were certain things that are critical to find somebody that were missing. And two of my favorite things to find out that will help me greatly know who somebody is and help me find them. First and foremost is their nickname, because 98% of the population does not go by their birth given name. Everybody knows me as Alex Price. It's not my birth given name. I've gone by Alex since 3rd grade, but it's not what's on my birth certificate. Years ago at a trade show, somebody called me SkipGuru, and that has stuck for 25 years now. And I've made it into kind of my own trademark, if you will.
Well, and I've noticed on a lot of social media, it's almost exclusively nicknames. And since Facebook's kind of clamped down, you used to be able to put their telephone number in the search the search box, and it would pop up their name or pop up their particular page, and they don't do that anymore. So when you've got somebody who has just a street name for their Facebook page, it can be difficult to find when you're trying to find some. They may be completely active on that page, but you'd never know who they were, because they're using some completely random name.
Well, there's several types of nicknames. There's a professional nickname like SkipGuru. There's
right.
Alex, which is the name I've gone by since 3rd grade. Then there can be a family nickname that is only known within the close family and maybe some very, very close friends. Then you've got street nicknames. And when you're dealing with certain professions, they may have a name they use as far as in a law enforcement, or not to be risque, but strippers and so forth. That
Sure.
Those individuals, that's the only name anybody knows them by. Nobody's ever known their birth given name, because they deal in cash. When you're dealing with people on the street and gangs and so forth, people only know their street nickname. So a nickname should be part of the application process. Another thing that should be a part of the application process are people's hobbies. People's hobbies literally define who they are. In the world today, people will work in a job 40 hours a week that they absolutely detest, just to get those 2 weeks a year where they can go out and do what their true passion in life is. And a hobby is something that we never give up. It's something usually we start as a child, and we may scale it back as we get older due to health conditions, economic conditions, any number of things, but it's something we rarely give up. I've been in martial arts since I was 4. I was a power lifter and bodybuilder in my youth, and there's nothing about Alex Price today that says body or builder, but I can tell you who won the Olympia because I still follow the sport. And everybody's like that. You've got an avid hunter. Well, he'll miss court. He'll get divorced. He'll lose his car. But by Skippy, his hunting license will be up to date.
Yeah, again, part of this is trading stories, and I try to fall not back into that too much. But we had a guy who was actually a practicing lawyer in this area, and who, lost his mind, basically ran off with a younger girl. Ended up, he was sleeping on the beach in California for a while, having a hell of a time finding him. And he finally came back to the area, and it basically caught him going to a wine and cheese tasting. It's like, what are you doing going to a wine and cheese tasting when you've left your family behind and all this other stuff? But basically, that was the sort of thing that he did. He went to these sorts of events, and that's where we ended up catching him at.
Well, and if you place yourself in the shoes of the subject you're looking for, once you know the things I'm talking about them, and you're going to find yourself more often right than wrong. Because we're creatures of habit, we all utilize statistically the same ATM machines week in, week out. Now, the debit card has lessened the need for ATMs, but cash is still king. So when we do use one, we use one or two. We shop at the same 2 grocery stores, the same 2 clothing stores. We eat at the same 3 to 8 restaurants week in, week out, month in, month out, depending upon what our taste of the day is. And each one of those examples is and geographics can spell a little difference in this if you're living in a rural area or a state like North, South Dakota, Montana, so forth. But every one of those examples I just gave is usually within a 1 to 2 square mile radius of your work or home. So if I know someone has shopped at a particular grocery store, if I look in that 1 mile radius of that grocery store and see if it's mostly residential or mostly commercial, I can start to pin down a possible place of employment or a possible location they could be staying at, because I love using Google Pro, not Google Maps, Google Pro. It's a free download, but it has far more features to it with Google Pro. And I can overlay all the addresses of relatives, known associates, and see if any of those people are within that 1 square mile radius. If it's a highly commercial area, I know we all reach a certain point in our lives where we can't change our vocations. So if he was a plumber at the time of the application, he's not a doctor now. So I can go with a quick phone call to the local chamber of commerce and get every business within that 1 square mile radius that might have a need for my subject's vocation. Now I put boots on the ground or dial for dollars. And I can do the same thing on the residential part. I go to the app and they were in a apartment that cost $1,000 a month. Well, I know he hasn't gone up the economic ladder, he's gone down it. So a quick phone call to the local area chamber of commerce can give me every rental property that meets the economic demand I'm looking for. And now again, I dial for dollars or put boots on the ground. So these are theories of mine that I've practiced over the years that work. And it's basically taking tried and true old school techniques, a la the great Jim Rockford from the Rockford Files, and combining them with today's technology like Penelope Garcia from Criminal Minds, and merging those 2 worlds.
So you've sort of gotten into this a little bit. You've talked about nicknames and hobbies, activities, that sort of thing. So as a bail bondsman is taking an application, and I've seen some terrible applications. I mean, not even social security numbers. Here's a name, here's a case number, maybe I've got a date of birth. And you look at these things. No, that's not my own paperwork, but my bail enforcement agents have certainly do some freelance work for some other people, and they'll come and go, hey, can you look at this and tell me what you can find out here? And so you look at this and, why did you even do this bond? You don't have any information about this person. And then you kind of slowly build out, from sources you can gather and build that up. But what sort of information, just in general, should a bail bondsman be trying to get at the point of contact initially? When the clients are the most cooperative they're ever going to be, what sort of information should you get as a baseline level of information before you make a bond?
I'm glad you said the word baseline, because everything starts with a baseline. And when you're filling that application out with the individual, you should be holding a conversation with them, not an interrogation. You should get them a cigarette, get them a Coca-Cola, get them a coffee, because what you're trying to do is to place the individual in the most comfortable state possible in probably one of the most uncomfortable or stressful points in that individual's life, unless they're a repeat offender and they're just used to it. Because by putting someone in that state of comfort, it's going to engage them more in having a conversation with you. And I don't care who you're talking about. Every human being on the planet loves to talk. It's part of being a human being. When someone tells me, oh, I've got this friend that's coming to dinner with us tonight, they're kind of quiet, but once they get to know you, they'll talk your ear off. No, they're not quiet. You're just not listening, or you're not talking about subjects that interest them.
Right.
Once you get them comfortable and you hit up on UFC, woodworking, whatever the case may be, then they turn into Chatty Cathy or Talking Ted. You're never going to be an effective skip tracer or interviewer or even an application taker, if you will, if you don't apply two simple, basic human emotions and functions. And this goes across pretty much any walk of life to me. One is you've got to show empathy. And people will kind of give me a stink eye when I bring that up. There's no way I can be empathetic to this guy that just killed somebody. No, you have to understand what empathy is. Empathy doesn't mean I agree with you. Empathy doesn't mean I approve of your actions. Empathy is just showing a common human emotion, and you can do that with just one word at times. You and I are having a conversation, and you're telling me some problems you're having, and one, I'm looking you in the eye. I never wear a watch, because the second I look at a watch, it's telling the other person I've got somewhere more important to be. I never have a cell phone anywhere near me during conversations or during a podcast that we're doing now, because again, that tells the other party that I've got somewhere more important to be. So those are simple things that I do. And to go back to what I was saying on empathy, I can just simply use wow. And by the inflection of my voice, it can mean 5, 6, 8 different things, and then simply tell me more.
Right.
Now I'm engaging them, but now I got to use the difference between active and inactive listening. You have 2 ears, 1 mouth. You need to use one twice as much as you do the first one. So by using open-ended questions, bait questions, I'm trying to get that person to talk. The more they talk, the more information they're giving to me. So when I set that level of comfort at the application stage, and I show them just simple human empathy, I'm also, the second most important thing is I am non-judgmental at all times. If you are a believer, you know that, God did not give us 2 things, only 2 blessings that God didn't give us. He said, vengeance is mine. And he said, thou shalt not judge. So I don't judge anybody for their mistakes or their successes. By the minute someone feels they're being judged by another party, they immediately become defensive and combative. How am I going to get true, accurate information from them if they are offended and they're now combative? I can't. So I show them human empathy. I'm non-judgmental, and I hold a conversation with them. And while I'm doing that, I bring up things, and I'm also observing. I'm observing the stuff that's in the background of your office, the statue in the back. I'm looking to see what you're wearing. I'm looking to see your jewelry, any tattoos, anything that could get me the ability to strike up a conversation. I see you're wearing an Alabama shirt. You a fan of Alabama? Oh, roll tide, roll, baby. Boom. He's now comfortable to talk about that. And if I get him comfortable talking about sports, I can transition that into any other topic I want. And just knowing he's an Alabama fan, if there's a big game on this weekend, am I going to check the local pubs out that have the Auburn game or the local pubs that have the Alabama game? No, because Grandmama was right when she said birds of a feather flock together.
Right. Well, one of the books that I read years ago on private investigation, because part of my background on this came from the family had a private detective business, and they did a lot of insurance work and stuff like that. But so you did a lot of research trying to train yourself how to do that sort of thing. And so you talk about one of the books I was reading on that talked about how many horrible cups of coffee the guy had to during his interview process. He'd come into houses and interview people, and if they offered him a cup of coffee, he would absolutely take that cup of coffee and sit down and choke it down, no matter how bad it was, because it built a rapport with that other person when he was talking to them. And once you could have that some degree of rapport with him, they would be more forthcoming with information about what was going on, whether that was in their benefit or not. But they were more open when they felt that you had a connection with them.
Well, it's great that you said rapport, because it's all about building rapport and trust. And everything that I am before you right now is because of some of the great men and women, legends in several industries that I have that have been mentors to me. And now here at 50 some odd years old, now at 60 years old, I've had some of the most unbelievable mentors that have become personal friends. And every listener here should check out the podcast Forged in Trust by Robin Dreeke, Dreeke, and his website that he has classes. Robin was the head of the behavioral analysis unit. His job was to find spies and get spies to turn, so forth, of the FBI for 30 years. He's recently retired, and he's got several books on how to instantly build rapport with people. And if you're building trust with your customers, what does that do for a bondsman? That makes, if your customer trusts you, you stand a much better chance of them staying in contact with you. You stand a major chance of them, at least if they miss court, answering your phone call or staying in contact with you and turning themselves in, rather than going through a lengthy and expensive chase. So in every walk of life, everything, networking is about building rapport and building trust among your peers.
Well, and when someone has missed court, I know that one of the experiences I've had is you'll call them and go, "Hey, you missed court," and depending on their relationship with you and how much they believe what you're saying, I will always explain to people, this is how you fix this. You can go on this date and see the judge at this amnesty docket. And if you get in there to that amnesty docket, the judge is going to give you a new court date and get you back on track, and everything will be gold. And, most of the time they'll do it, but every once in a while you'll have somebody who's like, "Oh, you're just trying to trick me in there." And they get paranoid and they won't come in. And then you ultimately have to go pick him up, and you can make the argument, well, this is your only option. Either I'm going to have to come pick you up, or you're going to try and get this straightened out on your own. This is the best thing for you. But if they don't believe you, if they don't have that trust with you, they're not going to follow through on that and straighten that out. It doesn't help you, and it doesn't help them.
Well, I can say honestly, with all due respect, 9 out of 10 times, the ones that don't believe their bondsman, or don't believe their creditor, or don't believe their insurance company, is because the latter has failed at the very front end to build that rapport and build that foundation of trust. You do have a certain section of the population that are professional debtors or professional arrestees, if you will. So those are the ones that the chase is always going to be on. They're your repeat offenders that either you or someone you know bailed them out, you bailed out somebody in the family. You've already got a basic bio on the person if you just dig through your own personal files.
Well, let's kind of, we're getting, close to the end here. So let's kind of run through some stuff. Some of these skip tracing techniques that we've talked about, using skip tracing techniques to make decisions about who to bond, basically skip tracing on the front end. So you're using the techniques and the things you've learned skip tracing to make decisions about who to post bond. If you have an understanding of the important information together, I've noticed that bondsmen who've worked for me in the past that started off as bail enforcement agents, they generally focus in on different pieces of information than the bondsmen who were not actively picking people up. Like, for instance, they'll get the kinds of cars that they're in and the tag numbers, and they'll get the type of car that the cosigner came in, and yet that way they know that if they can drive by an address and that car's parked out there, hey, there's a pretty good chance that that's the right location for that person. So what are some of the skip tracing techniques that bondsmen can use in the initial decision about whether or not who to post bond for?
Marvelous question. And let me preface it with whatever you do, you have to be systematic and you have to do the same thing for everybody. Because a bond is an insurance policy to the court that someone's going to show up at a specific date and time. And a lot of bondsmen don't understand that you're basically extending credit. So if you only do some due diligence on half your bonds, but not on the other bonds, it opens you up to liability from a number of different federal regulations. So whatever process you put into place, you need to do it across the board on everybody. And I've been working on, for the past year, a validation product that Locate Smarter is getting ready to unveil here in a very short period of time, that with one click of a mouse, you'll be able to validate anything that's on an application. And this tool is going to, where legally available, is going to also include some real-time DMV data within it. But I just want to do certain things that sometimes may take a couple minutes, but you're a current active bondsman. So you will agree with this more than any podcast I've done. The best skip to have is the one you're not invested in. And probably a quarter of all bonds that go into default could be stopped if people would do 5 minutes of due diligence on the front end. And that's making sure the phone number they're being given works. Make sure the references on the app actually know the guy and have talked to him in the past 12 months. Some very simple things like that we did in the fintech world years ago with paper buyers, and now everything's an algorithm and it goes off credit scores. So frauds are easier to do now than they were back in the day, but it's built into the whole big world. Well, in the bond community, you're dealing with cash. That bond is cash out of your checking account you've got to get to the court. So I think taking 3 minutes to build out a productive application that tells you not only name, rank, and serial number, but it tells you a little bit about who the person is. Writing down simple things like tattoos, nicknames, hobbies. Those are critical things that, should the investment go bad, are going to be solid gold for you to try to find the person.
So, I'll, get back into a little bit of story mode here. But I had this guy pull up in my parking lot with a flatbed trailer and what looked like everything he owned strapped down on the trailer. Car had Texas plates, and of course we're in Kansas City. And he comes in and announced that he needs to bond out his girlfriend so that they can get the hell out of this rotten county. Now, that's sort of a big red flag when somebody walks in and basically says that they're going to run off, and that's a pretty obvious red flag. but they're not always quite so obvious. What are some of the more subtle red flags that bail bondsmen should be looking for in the data that they gather?
Well, that is one, and just listening to your customer. If you've got somebody in Gulf Shores, Alabama, at a concert at the wharf, and they get arrested on a drug charge, and he's from Arkansas, you need to make sure that your cosigner and your information is pretty jam up, because guess where he's heading the second he gets out of jail? He's heading back home.
Right.
So it's all about getting as much information as possible on the front end of the investment should it go bad. I mean, I can't stress that enough. It's all about all the front end validation, and you should look at every bond as if that bond is going to go bad. What information should I have? And that's why it doesn't matter if it's $1,000 bond or $1 million bond. I'm going to go through the process of the information that I gather systematically the same way, regardless, because one, from an auditing point of view, all the different regulation nation that so many bondsmen don't even realize they fall under, such as Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, Consumer, the CFPB, the FDR, the FRCA, etc., the Telecom Act. These are all federal regulations, and I'm not even going to talk about all the different state regs. So living in regulation nation, you've got to make sure that you do the same thing the same way every time, so you're not accused of favoritism or towards
discrimination
any
or
race,
something along those lines. Exactly.
Gender, anything. So that's one of the big keys. And I like to listen to what if you're listening to what the person's telling you, they're going to tell you whether they're going to stay local or they're going to be gone.
Well, one thing that we have happened quite a bit, and we always key up for it, is when somebody calls and they want to post bond for someone, you're like, well, what's their name? Well, Alex. Well, what's Alex's last name? And then you'll hear the phone, turn away from the phone, and they'll turn around to somebody else and ask what that person's last name is. It's like, well, I can tell you right now, I'm not going to let you sign for that person. You don't know them. This friend of a friend thing is not going to work for us.
Well, you just said a perfect thing. And I said earlier that we have 2 ears, 1 mouth. We need to use one twice as much as the other. When we ask somebody a question, we need to be quiet. And to be a little rude, we need to shut up. So if I say, hey, let me speak to Alex, I'm being dead quiet. In radio, it's called dead air, and it's like the worst thing that can happen to a radio personality. But to me, it's where a lot of things happen, because I hear what's going on in the background. If I say, let me speak to Shane, and someone yells out, hey, Big Papa, or whatever the family nickname is, I'm jotting that down.
Right.
Because when I'm talking to future people, if I know your nickname, or I know your family nickname or your street nickname, it's when I'm using it with the person I'm talking to, it's going to start immediately setting a level of comfort, because I know you're Big Papa. Well, I got to know you. So it lays that instant rapport and foundation down almost instantly, or starts to at least lay the baseline or the framework of it.
So let's kind of wrap this up and get to your stuff. Tell us a little bit more about Locate Smarter. I know that's the stuff that you're working on. How does that differentiate? How would we use that particular service?
Locate Smarter is a data vendor, similar to say an IRB or Lexus, but they're new to the industry, but they're not new to data. They've been around for quite some time. And during 2020, when it crushed, as I said, my traveling and teaching, these guys reached out to me, and I've known their president for probably 20 years, and I've been very pleased with their data. They really allowed me to kind of play mad scientist behind the scenes and build some products that nobody has or ever will have, because none of the other data companies have a skip tracer that works for them that actually knows the ins and the outs of the job and what people use and why they use it. And I've been having a blast teaching webinars. They've got some of the best matching logic I've seen in several years. And what I mean by matching logic, if you go to a database, the first thing I like to do is I like to pull relatives.
Right.
If I look at my personal relatives and the data company, which most of them will, shows 150 relatives, I know they have a very loose matching logic, which is going to make me run down a lot of false trails. The very first time I went to Locate Smarter, pulled my relatives, it made sense because I'm an only child, an only grandchild, and every family member I have, other than my wife, my son, and my daughter, are deceased. So when I pulled relatives up in their system, it showed my mom with a deceased flag, my wife and my son. My daughter was in college, so she had no paper trail. So it really showed me a lot about their matching logic. And these guys have built one of the coolest cultures I've seen in many years as far as internally. Their entire company motto comes down to two words, and it's "we care." And it's not a slogan, they actually do. If you call me, you're getting me every time. If you email me, you're getting a reply back in minutes. You're not waiting days, weeks, or never.
And is it the type of company?
Yeah, and they're one of the few privately held companies left in data.
But that would actually be open to bail bondsmen, because I know that there's some
Yes.
companies that focus on us, but others are like, no, sorry, we don't do anything with you.
No, because of my background, I'm very, very focused and very active in the bond world on a day-to-day basis. I'd say 50% of my personal customers are in the bond community.
Okay.
And any of your listeners, if they call me, and I'll give my contact info before we split ties, I'll give them 7 days on the system at no charge. We're the only company that includes the comprehensive report in our platform as part of the whole gig. Everybody else separates it out. It charges $25 extra for it, transactionally.
Right.
And it's one of the best searches out there. And then we have some unique things like that validation report coming out that's going to be the first of its kind.
And that's they're locatesmarter.com.
Yes, sir. People can reach me direct at alex.price@locatesmarter.com, or they can just call me 251-366-7669. And I'll give them, like I said, 7 days, no charge on the system.
Is there another website or Facebook page or anything like that has links to the webinars and stuff like that you put on?
I have a private Facebook group that I did several years ago that's now, I never thought it would reach this, but it's 3,000 strong.
Wow.
And folks like Robin Dreek and other experts in the human behavior, OSNIT, social engineering world are in there. It's called SkipGurus. That's 'S tribe. And there's no memes, there's no political speech allowed, no nothing. All we do is post content and talk about skip tracing, OSNIT techniques, so forth. I've had a blast with that. And then I'm always on LinkedIn. That's a good way to reach out to me.
Okay. All right. Was there any other information you want to, put down before we wrap this up?
No, I'll wrap this up with how I like to wrap up all my classes, and just I'm humbled to be a part of this podcast. You've been a gentleman, and I thank you. And everyone, be blessed, be safe, and happy hunting.
Thank you very much, Alex, for taking the time to talk to us today. It's been really illuminating. I know I've taken some notes myself, and I'll be looking at some of these different things to look at helping find people.
If anybody wants to be part of one of the next webinars I do, I'll be doing another one in October. You can shoot me an email to add me, or to add your email to my list, and I'll make sure when the email blast goes out of the next webinar that you're included.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for joining us today on the Bail in the Midwest podcast.